There were definitely some pretty good moments among season 4, episodes 12 to 14, and I'm reviewing these in batches of 4 now, just so I can get through them a little bit more quickly. And there will, of course, be spoilers from now as I go through the episodes, but I'm kicking myself a bit for deciding to do them in batches of 4, because the last one ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, but we'll talk about that when we get there. First of all, Season 4, Episode 12, What Cabbie Saw. This is directed by Judy Pioli, and this one focuses mostly on Antonio. Antonio witnesses a robbery in a jeweller's, and it turns out that the guy, the robber, is at the airport. And obviously they realise they have to call the police. And I will say the police got there a little bit more quickly than I expected, because I think I was in not that I think they got there too quickly for the police, but for me, I was really enjoying how all the different characters responded to this criminal in different ways. Some were very, very nervous, and it was just fun to see how they were all responding. But then he did ultimately get arrested, and Antonio has to testify. But it turns out they let the criminal go. So, of course, Antonio is panicking, and he goes to stay with Joel and Brian and Lowell because he's scared. And this scene maybe went on a little bit longer than I liked, but it worked quite well still, because Antonio thought that this robber was outside and stalking him, and it ended up being the pizza guy, because Lowell had ordered a pizza, which I have to say was probably not the most predictable and definitely quite fun. And then we're back at the airport, and I absolutely loved this moment, because the guy is back at the airport, and Antonio decides, I can't live in fear, I'm just going to confront him, and he does. And it was a very well paced, but it was a little bit of time before he stood up and just said to Antonio, "Who are you?" Which I did see coming, and I rather enjoyed. And everything was going well until Lowell happens to mention Antonio was the guy who turned him in to the police. And all the thief wants to do is ask out Helen. He just wants to ask out Helen. And Antonio, well, we end with Antonio calling Helen's name, because if he doesn't, who knows what the thief will do to him. It's not the strongest ending, but certainly I didn't mind it, and I thought it was ultimately a decent episode. Nice to have some focus on Antonio. No negatives there at all. Then we come to Season 4, Episode 13, Labour Pains, directed by Andy Ackerman. And this one was quite an unpredictable episode as well. I've seen this before, but I couldn't fully remember how it ended. And I will say, I actually didn't love the ending. I did and I didn't. Lowell gets a job offer for Boston Logan, and the others suggest that this would be the perfect time to ask for a raise. And I'll come back to that in a second. We also have a subplot with Brian and his scrap of his little blue blankie, which was absolutely adorable. It's his sweet little good luck charm, and I don't really have any thoughts beyond that, but I certainly liked it. It was a decent subplot. So, obviously, Lowell asks for his raise, and both Joe and Roy say, we can't afford this. So they invite Lowell to dinner, and Roy had hired a girl to distract him, and that girl is called Marcia, and she's played by the wonderful Lisa Edelstein, so that was quite nice. And it's just not going the way Lowell wanted it to, and it seems like he's not getting this raise. They can't afford it. They're going to have to just say, you're going to have to take the job in Boston. And Antonio actually tells Lowell to keep it up, to keep trying to get this raise. But then it looks like Joe has hired a new mechanic, and they're sending Lowell off on his new job, and he leaves the airport. And we then cut back to Lowell back at the airport at Nantucket. We're at the end of the episode now. And up until this point, I enjoyed the lack of predictability, at least in my opinion. It wasn't clear exactly where it was going to end up, because it seemed like Lowell was definitely not getting his raise, but would he really want to leave? And he didn't want to leave. That's the thing. He didn't want to go to Boston. But obviously, if they're offering him more money, it's a better job. He was kind of torn. And at the very end, he's back at Nantucket, and it's quite a sinister ending, as it seems to imply that the new mechanic and Antonio are both in these barrels, that Lowell has stuffed them into these barrels. And I can see where they were going with the comedy, but I didn't find it funny. I can see what they were trying to do, but I didn't care for it. I didn't find it entertaining. I found it to be a little too bizarre for my liking, and in a way a little too outside of Lowell's character. Maybe one could argue that actually it's just a different side to him that we haven't seen, in which case, yeah, I could go along with that. But for me personally, I didn't love it, but ultimately not a bad episode. Then we have season 4, episode 14, I've Got a Secret. This one's directed by Andy Ackerman, and this one, I quite enjoyed it. Helen and Alex are bonding. I still don't know how I feel about Alex. I feel like they haven't really used the character enough, but certainly I liked her in this one. And Antonio stops by to drop something off, and he ends up joining in. They're having a bit of a slumber party, eating junk food, putting face masks on, generally having a nice time, and they're sharing stories. And Alex happens to mention that she once posed for Playboy. And it sounded a little bit unrealistic. Like, how can you just accidentally pose for Playboy one day? But actually, within the context of the episode, within her story, it made a lot of sense. And then we're back at the airport, and Alex returns Antonio's sweater, and the guys ask her, "You were with Alex?" And Antonio replied, and I love this, he said, "No, I was with Alex and Helen," which I thought was brilliant. And Antonio won't tell them what he found out. And we cut immediately to the next scene with Brian, Joe, and Lowell looking through stacks of Playboy magazines. So it seems like Antonio did say something. But we find out, I'd say relatively quickly actually, that it was Helen. Helen told somebody, who told somebody, who told somebody else, and it ultimately got back to the guys. And I think there's an important lesson there, that if somebody tells you to keep a secret, don't tell it to anybody. Because you never know who it's going to get back to. And you can't say, well, I told somebody who promised not to tell anybody. You promised not to tell anybody. So I think there's definitely a good lesson there. I also love, and I really loved this, is that Helen admitted it immediately, because Alex has gone into the bathroom. Have we seen the bathroom before? Is this the first time we're seeing it? I'm not sure. Certainly they don't use it often if it's not the first time. And Helen immediately tells Alex, it wasn't Antonio, it was me. And I thought that was really admirable. We also get a lot of comedy in this scene with Faye coming and going, trying to use the bathroom. Faye was really brilliant and really helped to lighten the mood a little bit. So I thought I've Got a Secret was a really enjoyable episode. Then we come to season 4, episode 15, The Gift, part 1, directed, of course, again by Andy Ackerman. And this one's quite interesting. We have 2 parts of the narrative. Helen is thinking about her cello and her music career that she's given up. And Faye, Roy, and Antonio are auditioning for Phantom of the Opera. Not opera, opera, which, yeah, I liked it. Good fun. The subplot there, we get a little bit of information about it. Definitely works well enough. Not the most fascinating, but it's fine. And the main focus is on this cello. And Brian suggests that Helen gets a second job so that she can at least get the money to make a down payment on a cello. So we cut to Helen in her new second job, gutting fish. And it's a very funny scene. I really enjoyed it. I would have liked to have spent a little bit more time there. And we're then learning more about the Phantom of the Opera and the characters, the characters have been given their characters in the play. And Antonio is describing the different roles, and he says to Roy, "You're an overbearing, pompous windbag." And Roy thinks that's a description of his character, and when he leaves, Antonio explains that actually that wasn't his character's description. He just always wanted to say that to Roy, which I rather liked. Unfortunately, Helen was let go from her job. How is she going to afford to get the cello? Well, we have a potential solution. We have a family meeting with Joe and Brian. Lowell, who lives there, wants to be part of the family meeting until he learns that it's about money, and quickly he scarpers. And Brian suggests that they remortgage the house and then use the money to buy Helen a new cello. And the next thing we know, there's a cello. Brian does, I think it was very obvious, and I guess funny in a kind of ridiculous way, where he brought in the cello, tripped and smashed it to pieces. This I think it was $15,000, correct me if I'm wrong. Or that might have been, I think that was, I can't remember. But either way, he smashed this cello. It was very obvious that it wasn't the $15,000 cello. He then brings out the real cello, and they call Helen in, and they display the cello, and she says, "How could you guys do this to me?" And we end the scene there. And we end on a cliffhanger. Why is Helen so distraught at this wonderful gift? Well, we'll find out in due course. I have watched the next episode. I do remember generally what happens, but I don't remember how it picks up. I don't remember if it picks up immediately where it left off. So I'm kind of annoyed at myself for ending this here, but I want to do them in batches of 4. So I will check out the next episode in due course. And for now, I'm pleased to say that apart from a few tiny things here and there, season 4, 12 to 15 is definitely a really decent batch of episodes.